Welcome to Empowerment Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Friedemann Schaub, and we have a very exciting topic today, I find, because it's something that I personally have been struggling with. And certainly, at least I assume, many of you do too. And the topic is something that also, I believe, in our society is more and more prevalent and more necessary to pay attention to. And it's timely that today Time magazine declared the Person of the Year award to the Me Too movement, this anti-harassment Me Too movement that was really coming to life, even though it exists since 10 years. It was founded by Tarana Burke, but it came to life in the wake of these revelations about Harvey Weinstein and other men, where millions of women, especially women, have shared their stories about being sexually harassed and assaulted. And this phenomenon took off in October after actor and activist Alyssa Milano followed a suggestion from a friend on Facebook and tweeted, "If you have been sexually harassed or assaulted, write Me Too" as a reply to this tweet. And that hashtag was tweeted, I think, a million times in just 2 days. And the Me Too movement sadly demonstrates how, especially at the workplace, some men, and also some women rarely, but that existed too, abuse their power to exploit and maltreat their coworkers. Yet, I do believe that sexual harassment, whether it's unwanted attention, whether it's abuse and assault, I believe this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to that, what we want to talk about today, which is the need to strengthen our boundaries, the need to stand up for ourselves. Now, this movement, the Me Too movement, revealed that millions of women have had some form of sexual harassment and maltreatment, and it took this movement to finally for them to speak up and say, yes, this happened to me and this shouldn't have happened to me. And you can imagine how long these women were quiet and felt maybe ashamed or insecure or afraid. And thanks to this movement, finally they had the courage and the power of the community to speak up and say that they have been the victim of that kind of abuse. But what if this movement is also giving us a reflection on the necessity of being more committed to our own boundaries? What if we are learning more how to set clear boundaries? Because when I talk to people that have been abused, physically, emotionally, sexually, one of the things that I often hear is that the moment when it happened, they were so surprised. They were so confused. They were so flabbergasted that they didn't really know what to do. They didn't really feel like they had the whereabouts, the tools, the awareness to do something that would have maybe changed the situation, or at least made them feel that they were able to fight for their integrity and stand up to be respected and treated with dignity. So I think in order for us to be in a place where we are able to protect ourselves more, we need to focus a little bit more on our boundaries. Because let's face it, this is really the tip of the iceberg, as I said, because when I talk to people that have been working in big corporations, they often tell me that the whole energy at the workplace, the culture at the workplace has changed in the last 10 years. A struggling economy maybe, combined with the high pressure of the shareholders, has just created an environment which doesn't have a lot of room for gratitude, loyalty, and many say even humanity. And so as a result, employees feel more and more worried and anxious about being replaceable, and therefore are much more willing to just shut up and put up rather than standing up for themselves. So they see healthy boundaries more as a luxury they can't afford. And isn't it true that in general in our society there is a trend where you could say that disrespecting others becomes more and more okay? I mean, we saw this at the whole presidential campaign last year, how there were new lows reached every week. But also social media with cyberbullying, road rage, domestic violence, and a resurgence of xeno and homophobia are just a few examples where you can see that personal boundaries get aggressively broken on a daily basis. And as they say, a lack of boundaries also invites a lack of a lack of respect. So, as I said before, many of my clients who struggle with fear and anxiety do have a hard time setting boundaries for different reasons. And today, I want to focus on 5 ways to create strong boundaries. 5 ways where you can learn to draw a line in the sand. You can learn to have a voice. You can learn to also change your perspective and keep your integrity. Now, in order to have a boundary, I believe it's not just about pushing people away and being angry, and it's also not just avoiding people and feeling like, well, my boundary is basically just to not get close to those that potentially can disrespect me. Now, this is a little bit like, the analogy of how do you fight a virus? I mean, you don't fight necessarily a virus like the flu virus by just, slapping your whole body full of disinfectants or never leaving the house. Ideally, you strengthen your immune system. And that's exactly what we need to do. We need to strengthen the boundaries. And for that, there is an internal process. And then there is the external process of boundaries. There is the internal way of just understanding more what boundaries for you personally mean and how you can see the reality of someone else differently that doesn't make you lose your power. And then there are practical steps on putting this into action. Now, when you ask yourself, do you have problems with boundaries? Do you feel like that already the holiday season is coming up? You are maybe a little bit worried about what's going to happen at the dinner table. Maybe your sibling will tease you again relentlessly, like he or she has done when you were little. Or maybe your mom going to make a remark on how old you look or how much weight you gain. Or maybe you just feel like that in general, there is a sense that you are, when you go out, not feeling totally safe. But at the same time, you may wonder, well, am I just too sensitive? When someone says something to me, should I really be hurt? Should I really feel bad? Is it my fault that I have that reaction? And that is the first thing we need to look at. Are boundaries something that for everyone should be the same? Or are boundaries something very personal, something that you have to define for yourself? So what may be okay for some person, they can just, like a duck, let it purl off their back. For another person, that may be a no-no. And how can you know the difference? How can you know what your boundary is and what is the right for you to preserve it? So if you have any questions, call in 888-418-6890 or use the instant messaging on the Transformation Talk Radio website. with anything about boundaries. I'm sure that some of you do have questions, and maybe you have found ways on how to strengthen your boundaries, how to be more assertive, and how to also notice what positive changes you have actually been able to make because of setting stronger boundaries. Now, the first step, and we're going to go further into this after the break, but the first step to creating boundaries is to be able and to notice that you may actually miss some. Well, how do you know that you're missing boundaries? Well, there's a very simple rule of thumb. And that rule of thumb is that you know that your boundaries have been broken when somebody causes you to feel frustration, discomfort, anger, hurt, or maybe also a sense of anxiety or shame and embarrassment. Whenever that happens, you know something that person did or said was going under your skin, was breaching your boundary. You were treated in a way that you don't like to be treated. Now the question is now, how do you define your boundaries? And how do you know which boundaries you want to really enforce and preserve, and which boundaries you may be able to be more flexible about? Welcome back to Empowerment Radio. We are talking about boundaries. Boundaries with others, boundaries to preserve our integrity. How do you do it? And why do we have so much problems with boundaries? Now, as children, certainly, we were shown boundaries. And everyone knows, for children, it's very important to have boundaries. Makes them feel safe, gives them guidance, it gives them a sense of someone cares. But at the same time, you could also say, well, maybe because as children we are told this is your boundary and this is what you're supposed to do and this is what's expected from you, maybe we haven't really figured out our own. Maybe we have been relying so much more on doing the things that we know others are approving of, that we completely forgot to define what actually is right for us, what works for us. It's almost like as kids, at the beginning we feel all excited, all powerful, all lovable, and then the boundaries come in, and they're important. I don't deny that. But then afterwards, we are going out there as adults, and we are a little bit clueless. I mean, I certainly know for myself that I was struggling with boundaries. I had two ways to have boundaries. One boundary was that I simply became a pouting little boy who was just walking away when someone wasn't nice. I mean, my parents were always making fun of me that I was clumsy. Now, I could have, actually, I did surgery, and I did even surgery on rats, which actually shows that I'm not really bad when it comes to using my hands, but in the eyes of my parents, I was a big klutz. And so it was almost like they were waiting, including my sister, by the way, waiting for me to spill a glass of milk or to drop something, and then the big laughter happened. And for years, I was just swallowing my pride, saying nothing, but really kind of collapsed in myself. Didn't really work because it continued. Now, the other boundary was the instantaneous eruption. Well, not actually instantaneous. I was waiting like a pressure cooker. But the eruption of anger, the outburst. I had a roommate, for example, who completely disregarded my maybe Germanesque need for just neatness. I didn't like to have a mess, especially in the kitchen. So with my roommate, always the same story. I clean up over the weekend while she was gone. She came home Sunday night and for some reason had always an appetite for spaghetti and tomato sauce. So she cooked it and of course splashed it all around. It's like she was bathing in it. And as soon as I saw that the next morning, I just felt a rage rising inside of me after all this scrubbing and cleaning and wiping down. How dare she? But probably 9 out of 10 times I said nothing. And the 10th time I exploded, and she just did not understand and felt like there was something wrong with me. Again, nothing really changed. Why? Because I really didn't create clear guidelines for people to understand what my boundaries were. I didn't really communicate them well or didn't communicate them at all. And that is something that I think a lot of us are doing. Sometimes we are not saying no to a person because we don't want to disappoint them. It's more important to please them. We are thinking about the consequences. What if we get rejected? What if we don't get that job? What if they think less about us? So that's kind of that pleasing side. And then there is the other, as I mentioned before, where we just doubt ourselves. Am I really overreacting because others don't seem to be bothered? Is there something wrong with me? And again, we have to look at our feelings, looking at the discomfort, the anger, the feeling of being ashamed or hurt that guide us to understand that something was wrong. Something in this relationship, in this situation, in this interaction isn't working. So here are a few questions you may want to ask yourself that can help you to see what boundaries you may have or may be lacking. How often do you worry about what other people think? And when was the last time you said no to someone? And how did you feel? And when was the last time you said yes to someone or something and actually didn't want to do so, but somehow you did it anyhow? And how did that feel? And when you think about saying no right now, do you feel a little scared? Do you feel a little bit like, ugh, I'm doing something to that person, maybe feeling even a little bit guilty? And then think about the last time when someone made you feel angry, hurt, or ashamed, and how you responded to that. What did you do? Did you show your feelings? Did you express what happened? Does this person know more about you, or did you just hide it and not really give yourself a voice? So what you can do is just to go through different situations in your life, different relationships, maybe work, family, friends. You can even go back and think about your childhood and think about what kind of role model did you have when it comes to boundaries, and who did you watch having those or having none. And when you are looking through those different aspects of your life, just write down where you can see when this person, for example, criticizes me, when I do have a great idea and immediately someone says it's not going to work, when I wear something nice and people tell me this is not, really fitting you, or when you are around someone who just dumps their anger or frustration on you and holds you hostage in their negativity. These can be just examples that you're going to write down, and then you're going to write next to it how that makes you feel, and then you're going to write next to it what you can do better. How do you want to actually be in a situation like this? Rather than feeling deflated, rather than feeling, again, trapped, hostage held, rather than feeling that you're somehow abused by someone's acting out or someone's unawareness and just, maybe negativity that they are projecting onto you. How do you want to deal with something like this instead? What would be the ideal outcome, and how would that feel? So what you can just see is that certain things are more important than others. Maybe it's not so important for you to always get applause for the choices of your clothing. But maybe it is very important to you that you don't feel like you have to listen to someone for hours about how miserable their marriage is. Maybe it is important for you to have not someone simply take your time and service for granted and always asking for more and more and more, but instead being really respected and really also being asked, is this okay for you? Or maybe also, if you're not asked, it's okay for you to have a no. So that brings me to the second point. So once you know that you have certain kind of boundaries and that those boundaries are important to you, and you can always gather more. It's a little bit like a map that you're creating, a map where you see, okay, this hurts more than others. It's like the physical body. When someone is hurting your eye, it hurts more than when someone is slapping your butt. It's just, there are different aspects that are more sensitive. And this is also with our personal integrity. And when you do this, you can also get a little bit more aware of your beliefs, because a lot of what happens in our boundary setting has to do with what we really believe about ourselves. When we don't feel good enough, when we feel like we have to really, work hard to be appreciated, when we don't feel really able to measure up, or if we don't feel really lovable or safe. All of those beliefs make it much more likely for you to have your boundaries simply collapse as soon as someone is pushing. And working on those core beliefs is a form of healing, is a form of empowerment, and certainly something I do with my clients all the time, which is one of the most transformational process you can go through, changing those programmings and the beliefs that have been really holding you stuck in those false identities of who you are and how you've seen yourself. Now, the next step of setting boundaries is an external step, which is about being assertive, or as my wife says, no is a full sentence. When we come back, we will talk about more how to be assertive and how to speak up, and also what you can do to just feel like that your words really matter and are heard. So stay tuned. We will be right back.